Where there's no like they don't go behind the ears, they don't go on top of the nose. Where the glasses go? What type of engineering is this? This might be the most amusing part of the video. What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, then welcome to our little corner of the internet. Today we're going to be watching a video titled Before Route 66, the story of America's first highway. Without further ado, let's see what this video is about. Let's see what this video is about.
Stretching from Times Square to San Francisco's Lincoln Park, the Lincoln Highway was the first true transcontinental road in American history. Launched in 1913, when most rural roads were still impassable mud, it cut through 14 states and stitched together the country like nothing before it. More than just a route, it was a national experiment, privately promoted, patriotically branded, and marketed as a tribute to Abraham Lincoln. It offered the first coast-to-coast drive, inspired the creation of road maps and tourist camps, and kick-started a romance between Americans and their automobiles. And yet, you've probably never driven it. Overshadowed by Route 66 and carved apart by the interstate system, the Lincoln Highway faded from view, even as it laid the very groundwork for America's modern road culture. So, how could a road that changed everything be so thoroughly erased from public memory? Stay tuned to find out as we uncover the forgotten story of the Lincoln Highway. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Before the Lincoln Highway, a coast-to-coast journey in the US wasn't something that you simply did. If you wanted to get from Manhattan to San Francisco, your best bet was train, typically via the recently completed transcontinental rail system, which was fast by 19th century standards, but it wasn't exactly personal travel. And if you had freight to move, you either had to book space on a train, hire a team of freight haulers, or took your chances with early shipping companies. Some still using wagons for the first leg of the journey. But let's say you wanted to make that same trip, but by—
This is so cool. These videos, I cannot get enough of like videos from history. Like these people were actually there. That's so cool.
By your own means, via car. Well, in 1912, that idea bordered on lunacy. For the most part, there were no developed maps, no signals, and no unified road network. America's highways weren't even really highways in the modern sense. Rather, most were just dirt paths left over from the horse and buggy era. Paved roads mainly existed inside of city limits, and a few so-called auto trails were promoted by regional clubs, but they were usually disconnected and barely maintained. In other words, outside of major towns back then, a transcontinental motorist faced axle-deep mud, foreboding unbridged rivers, and the very real possibility of getting lost in an unmarked desert. That's where car clubs came in. In the early 1900s, these weren't just hobbyist groups. They were part traveler's aid and part political lobby. Local auto clubs printed their own maps, painted signs on telephone poles, and even shoveled mud from rural sketches just to keep a route drivable. If you saw a road marked with red, white, and blue bands, that likely meant someone from the American Automobile Association or similar group had come through with a paintbrush and a mission. Still, all of that patchwork couldn't solve the bigger problem, or at least that was the case until the Model T made the Lincoln Highway inevitable. This car was affordable, rugged, and easy to repair, and practically overnight put long-distance driving within reach of every American. And
I would not imagine a long-distance drive in a car like that. Like, now I feel like I'm worrying about nothing because I've been thinking about, like, I need to change my car because my car is from, like, 2011. It's a little old. It has a lot of kilometers to it, you know. Like, it's getting old. And I'm like, I can't drive to Finland with that because I would love to drive to Finland with my dog. And I just, like, I'm thinking that my car can't handle it. But if that car could handle the Road 66, I mean, what? How? How? Maybe it was like clothes, like they were just more resistant back in the day. I don't know.
Once they all had their cars, the pressure to build a real road network became impossible to ignore. And I need to emphasize once again that at this point in the story, there was still no single highway across America, leaving some citizens, particularly those who belonged to bicycle and motor clubs, decided that if the government wasn't going to build a network, then the matter needed to be dealt with privately. Now, not to exaggerate here, but this was the type of quest that really requires government support. It's not dissimilar to building a new civilization in some ways. I mean, America was a wild place back then, so could you imagine taking on a challenge that big? Actually, this makes me think of something that's been sitting on my desk all week. If you're into history, invention, or just learning how humans figured things out from scratch, this is worth a look. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization. Not just any book, it's a visual encyclopedia that brings together humanity's most impressive inventions, from primitive tools to modern
Really
discoveries
cool.
that changed how we live. What really caught my attention wasn't just the content, which is incredible, but it's the way that this was made. Over 400 pages, hand-drawn illustrations in a medieval and technical style, matte art paper, and a premium session. For a special discount, description and the code
Very, very well hidden advert, but that looks really cool.
It's History 10. Thank you to Hungry Minds for sponsoring this episode, but now let's get back to the story of the Lincoln Highway. Well, local car and bike clubs laid the groundwork. It was clear by 1912 that something bigger, national, was needed. That same year, Carl G. Fisher, a former bicycle racer turned auto tycoon, proposed an idea that sounded insane to most: a hard-surfaced road from New York to San Francisco. He exclaimed, quote, "Let's build it before we're too old to enjoy it." Though before it became
The glasses look like they've been drawn on, but I don't think they are. Where they hanging from? How do you keep the glasses on your head? What is this? There's no, like, they don't go behind the ears, they don't go on top of the nose. Where the glasses go? What type of engineering is this? This might be the most amusing part of the video. How is that possible?
Became the Lincoln Highway, Fisher's original pitch was to call it the Rock Highway, a reference to the crushed stone and cement surface he envisioned. But since the name lacked broad appeal, he rebranded in honor of Abraham Lincoln, which gave the project a more patriotic identity, helped court national media attention, and secured donations from across the country. According to one source, The Story of a Crusade, Fisher's plan was simple in theory but radical in practice, as he didn't want government funding. Instead, he asked the automobile industry to raise $10 million through voluntary contributions. Manufacturers, dealers, tire companies, and so on. They would all fund the road that would sell their products. One major figure didn't join, however: Henry Ford. Despite dominating the auto market, he refused to support the concept of the Lincoln Highway. Fisher tried to persuade him from every angle: personal letters, persuasion from politics, even outreach through notable people like Edison and Taft. But Ford believed that roads should be built by the public, not promoted privately. This was disastrous, as his refusal nearly derailed early fundraising and shook other manufacturers' confidence. Even so, he secured pledges of over $1 million in the first month, including $300,000 from the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company and $150,000 from Packard. But
That is so much money, but imagine back then how much money that is.
Fisher knew that money alone wouldn't sell the idea. He needed stature. So he recruited names like Henry B. Joy of Packard, Frank A. Seiberling of Goodyear, and A.Y. Goen of Lehigh Portland Cement to serve on the founding committee. We should also point out that Henry B. Joy, president of the Packard Motor Car Company,
Oh, the glasses like kind of like engrave in your nose, so or what? That looks uncomfortable, but also very slick. Okay, I like it.
quickly emerged as the guiding force behind the Lincoln Highway Association. He wasn't just a figurehead. Joy personally financed press campaigns, organized route research, and pushed state officials to act. His organizational discipline gave the project legitimacy. According to the association's own records, Joy's, quote, "farsighted wisdom and tireless work from coast to coast were essential to transform Fisher's dream into a functioning reality." And so it was. By 1913, the Lincoln Highway Association was formally organized in Detroit, and the group constantly pointed out that this was not just a transportation project. It was marketed as a patriotic tribute to Abraham Lincoln. In fact, according to the Complete Official Road Guide, Joy believed that the best memorial to Lincoln wasn't a statue or a building, but a road that united the nation. Government support was minimal at first. In fact, only 28 states even had road budgets in 1912, and only a handful of them had functioning highway commissions. This meant that the Lincoln Highway Association had to function like an infrastructure startup, handling things like routing, promotion, public relations, and political lobbying, all on its own. Designing the highway was just as complicated since there was still no modern road survey, not to mention satellite imagery. Hence, the route itself was stitched together from local trails, farmer lanes, and railroad service roads. The association's field secretaries, like H.C. Osterman, drove every mile of potential roadway, reporting back with conditions, travel hazards, and local support or resistance. He would ultimately log over 250,000 miles on Lincoln Highway.
Why would locals resist to that though? Because that would bring so much traffic in, right? Like, I don't see why someone would be like, no, I don't want this to link to the other side of America. Like, why? You know, it's a great thing. It's weird that they were in instantly like, yes, this is like what we need, because it feels like something quite necessary for people to be able to commute from one side to the other.
Scouting duty. What made the Lincoln Highway different wasn't just the idea of the road. It was the audacity to build it, and basically without permission. It would be routed through towns whether they wanted it or not. Along the way, connecting communities that hadn't even seen an automobile yet. The vision was locked in, the money was on the table, and the route was drawn, meaning construction.
That is crazy. Imagine you've never seen a car before and suddenly like someone pulls up in a vehicle to your town and you're like, holy crap, like what is that? You know, because I would love to have experienced that. Like, to see someone just pull up in a car when you've never even seen a car before, you've never even thought of it as a thing, and be like, holy crap, like these people are coming from the future.
It's about to begin. In total, over 700,000 barrels of cement were used in the first decade of construction, with a major portion supplied by the Lehigh Portland Cement Company, which donated materials directly to the communities that agreed to pour them to specification. Sand and gravel were typically sourced locally to minimize freight costs, but in rural stretches, especially in Nevada and Wyoming, aggregate had to be hauled in by rail from as far as 200 miles away. Labor was whatever could be mustered up. Local road crews, hired contractors, even state prison workforces in some cases. Nevada used inmates to lay roadbeds across the desert between Ely and Fallon. In Iowa and Illinois, county supervisors directed day labor crews to haul rock, grade sections, and pour concrete on site, often without full mechanization. The so-called Ideal section in Indiana used 11,000 barrels of cement, 4,500 tons of sand, and more than 10,000 tons of crushed stone in a single 1.3-mile stretch. Drainage tile, street lamps, curbs, and guardrails were installed in the more premium sections of the road to showcase what a modern road could be. Property was rarely seized by eminent domain. Rather, the Lincoln Highway Association relied on local political pressure and persuasion. Landowners were told that the road would increase land value, and those who refused were often just bypassed entirely. As one field agent wrote in 1915, quote, "The road goes where it's welcomed. Otherwise, it just goes around." So by 1915, signage had been installed along the entire route with a painted red, white, and blue L marking telephone poles from coast to coast. The route wasn't set in stone. In fact, as engineering improved, local roads were upgraded and traffic patterns shifted. The Lincoln Highway.
That looks really, really cool. I kind of wish it still looked like that, you know, like with the gravel roads. It just looks so rural. I love it.
Was rerouted many times throughout the years. This sometimes meant that towns found themselves left behind, whereas others campaigned aggressively to be added. By 1927, the total length had been shortened by over 60 miles, compared with the original 1913 alignment. Anyhow, as the gaps closed and ribbon cuttings rolled west, the association prepared for its ultimate milestone. And with that, the country's first transcontinental road was about to open. As we mentioned previously, the Lincoln Highway wasn't a federal project, which was an inconvenient fact that brought some very undesirable consequences. It meant that no real central authority governed the entire road. There was no consistent standard of construction and no guaranteed continuity from one state to the next. In other words, this was basically a privately promoted concept, which, if we're being honest, turned out to be a patchwork of local roads. Indeed, some were freshly paved as hallmark examples of what a road could be, whereas others were barely passable. At best, the US government kind of encouraged the project, but they were completely hands-off. So, at the end of the day, driving this entire 3,389-mile route from Times Square to Lincoln Park in San Francisco could take travelers anywhere between 20 and 30 days. The road surface varied wildly. 1 mile could be concrete, whereas the next would be loose gravel and the one after that would just be a muddy farm path. Speeds averaged 18 to 20 miles per hour, and drivers constantly dealt with blowouts, overheated engines, livestock crossings, and the simple lack of reliable signage west of the Mississippi. Still, the trip was unlike anything else. The Lincoln Highway did pass through iconic places that had previously been almost impossible for everyday people to access. It skirted the edges of the historic Gettysburg battlefield, rolled through Chicago Heights, crossed the Missouri and Mississippi rivers, before it climbed the Rocky Mountains and crossed Utah's Salt Flats, before ultimately entering California through Sierra Nevada. Lodging was improvised early on. Sleeping in cars or tents, but within a few years, auto camps sprang up, evolving into motels, diners, and filling stations. A roadside economy was born. General stores sold.
Oh, I love that I'm watching this video because I've always wanted to do the Route 66. Obviously, like, it's something that, you know, is kind of like a must, at least for me, to experience. And it's really, really cool to see how it evolved during time. It makes it that much more significant. But yeah, they're very interesting.
Gasoline in 5-gallon cans, and blacksmiths often dabbled in mechanics, whereas the towns themselves competed to be on the route by painting slogans like "See us via the Lincoln Highway" on every wall in sight. The association's official guide included turn-by-turn directions, often down to 1/10 of a mile. Control stations allowed drivers to reset their odometers and stay on track, but as Field Secretary H.C. Osterman admitted, the guide, quote, often failed to describe the road quality, meaning a motorist could follow every instruction perfectly and still get stuck in rutted pastures. Even so, the public was never really discouraged. I'd even go as far as saying that the primitive highway shaped culture. Movies played a surprising role in the Lincoln Highway's popularity. Western films, already booming in the silent era, stirred national imagination and made traveling west feel like an adventure. For many Americans, the highway offered a tangible way to follow in cinematic footsteps, on wheels instead of horseback. Furthermore, it democratized vacationing, turning the...
Doing that on horseback, though, ooh, I would have loved that. Probably not possible anymore, but if it was. And also, where is this? Oh, look at that castle by the water. That is so pretty. Is that still a thing?
Road trip into a middle-class pastime. Business followed. Small freight began using trucks for time-sensitive shipments. And I'd also add that there was an interesting mix of vehicles using the road, as it wasn't just limited to cars. Horse-drawn wagons were still a common sight in places like Nebraska and western Illinois, all the way throughout the early 1920s. Everyone traveled the same road, just at very different speeds. But one problem they all had in common was that in many rural areas, there were no bridges at all. And drivers were known to cross active railroad bridges, waiting for trains to pass and then driving onto the ties at their own risk. So we might conclude by saying that this highway was more of a promise than a finished product. Radio was also spotty. east of the Mississippi. AM broadcast became available in major cities by the late 1920s, but west of Omaha, signal coverage thinned dramatically. Now, from high above...
Oh, I haven't even thought about this, like back in the day when they used to go on the Route 66 and you might not have like radio coverage and your car breaks down next to the road. What do you do? Like, there's nothing you can do other than just wait for someone to pass by and hope that they can help you. And then they won't have radio coverage either. So, I mean, that's nowadays as well. What do you do in that situation? Huh. Oh, maybe they'll like get someone to like go to the next town and like ask for help and I don't know. It's a bit crazy.
Of the road. Pilots in early mail planes did use the Lincoln Highway as a visual guide. Its straight sections and painted markings offered navigation long before beacons or radar. But even as traffic increased, the cracks began to show. With no federal oversight, the Lincoln Highway couldn't keep pace with the rising expectations. Pavement ended when county money ran out, detours multiplied, and safety varied wildly from one township to the next. Further complications arose out west, where local reactions were mixed. Some homesteaders welcomed travelers and sold them things like fuel or supplies, but others resented the arrival of well-off motorists and loud, dust-churning machines. There are even reports of locals who scattered nails and tacks to discourage or punish intrusions, especially after careless drivers struck their livestock. And then, in 1926, before matters felt entirely out of control, the U.S. government stepped in, not to save the Lincoln Highway, but to replace it. By the late 1920s, the Lincoln Highway had served its purpose. It connected the coast, inspired a national road movement, and proved that cross-country car travel was popular, though the movement that would follow had no place for nostalgia. In 1926, the U.S. government introduced the Federal Numbered Highway System, intended to replace named trails with a standardized, easy-to-navigate grid. And though the Lincoln Highway didn't disappear overnight, it was effectively dismantled on paper. It was broken into segments like U.S. Route 30, 50, and others. There was no formal abolishment, just a reclassification. The Lincoln Highway Association protested, and the New York Times published editorials lamenting the loss of named roads, but federal and state highway departments moved ahead anyways. By 1928, most of the official Lincoln Highway signs had been taken down by utility companies or replaced by U.S. route markers. What remained were concrete posts with bronze medallions installed by Boy Scouts that same year as a commemorative gesture, not for navigation, but for remembrance. Some of the route's towns tried to adapt. For example, DeKalb, Illinois was one of the first to rename its main street Lincoln Highway, hoping to preserve a link to the route. Others, especially in Nebraska and Wyoming, were bypassed altogether. Utah removed the Lincoln Highway alignment from its highway system entirely in 1927.
But how did it become the Route 66 then? I thought this was it. Why'd they take it down?
Citing issues with things like maintenance and routing conflicts. And as the Lincoln Highway declined, Route 66 rose to prominence. Officially designated in the same federal overhaul, Route 66 offered a more cohesive travel experience, better paving, consistent signage, and a growing ecosystem of roadside businesses. It quickly gained a cultural identity.
But why didn't Route 66, like I thought it was built on the Lincoln Highway. Like why didn't they utilize that to do it? Did I miss something just now?
Bolstered by pop music, migration stories, and commercial branding. This was all pretty ironic, since the road that replaced the Lincoln Highway was part of that same anti-sentimental highway plan, where numbers would replace names. Yet it became one of the most romanticized highways in the country. And if you want the full story of Route 66, we've also got a dedicated episode on that topic, which you can watch next by clicking the card above. Anyhow, by the 1930s, few travelers remembered the Lincoln Highway as a continuous route. Maps had dropped the names, and states stopped maintaining the old alignments altogether. Even Henry B. Joy himself, the man who had championed the road across 14 states, admitted that it had been erased from the public consciousness. So here's the thing, or my point in making this video. If America's first true transcontinental highway has now faded from memory, even in the words of its own creator, what physical elements have been left behind? Well, as luck would have it, My brother just traveled the majority of this pathway and left us with some pretty cool pictures. Let's retrace the old Lincoln Highway by
Cool.
going back to where the road began, Times Square, New York. At Broadway and 42nd Street, a bronze medallion set into the pavement still marks the official eastern terminus of the highway. From there, the original route crossed the Hudson by ferry to Weehawken, New Jersey, and passed through towns like Jersey City, where remnants of the alignment still function as local main streets. In Pennsylvania, the road skirts Valley Forge, climbs the Alleghenies, and enters Gettysburg, where markers and route signage still stands near the battlefield. This segment uniquely connects the highway to one of the country's most sacred historic sites, though Ohio retains some of the most visible tributes to the past. For example, in Clinton County, the Lafayette Hotel served as a control point and still bears its historic name. In Bucyrus, brick markers set with enameled Lincoln Highway plaques remain at key intersections. Crossing into Indiana, the Lincoln Highway runs through Fort Wayne, South Bend, and Valparaiso, where fragments of the original concrete surface still survive, and the route still carries that Lincoln Highway name. Similarly, DeKalb, Illinois still calls their main street Lincoln Highway, and visitors can find interpretive signage just outside of town. Iowa hosts multiple Lincoln Highway monuments. In Clinton, the Lafayette Hotel still stands, though
I think it's really sweet that there's still parts of history there and like people appreciate it because I don't know, it's just interesting and it's been a big part of the history of roads as well. Clearly, if it was like the first highway ever made, so it definitely feels like something that should have its little reminders.
multiple Lincoln Highway monuments. In Clinton, the Lafayette Hotel still stands, though Nebraska holds two of the most iconic surviving elements: seedling miles in Kearney and Grand Island. These demonstration strips of paved concrete were built to showcase modern road design and remain open to traffic to this very day. Heading further west to Wyoming, we find the Ames Monument, located at the
Whoa.
highest point of the Lincoln Highway near
That's cool.
Sherman Hill. Built in the 1880s to honor the Union Pacific backers, it was later incorporated into the Lincoln Highway route and still stands tall over the prairie. Now, Utah offers one of the most scenic surviving drives. While much of the original alignment has been absorbed into I-80, you can still follow portions west of Salt Lake through Ranch County and near Salt Air, where Lincoln Highway tourists once bathed in the Great Salt Lake. In Nevada, steel Lincoln Highway markers still dot some stretches of the road, particularly between Ely and Reno. Placed by the California State Automobile Association in 1917, these were among the first durable signs for long-distance automobile travel in the West. Finally, the highway crossed into California at Reno, then descended through the Sierra Nevada towards the Bay Area. Now, in Oakland, the Hotel Oakland and Oakland Garage were both built with Lincoln Highway tourism in mind, and they still exist near the original ferry terminal. A ferry once carried cars across the bay to San Francisco proper, where the road ended at Lincoln Park. There, at the edge of the continent, a bronze bust of Abraham Lincoln still faces the Pacific, marking the western terminus of the road that first united the country by car.
That looks so pretty.
And that's the story of the Forgotten Lincoln Highway. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and another special thanks to our sponsor, Hungry Minds, for making this episode possible. Make sure you check them out by clicking the link in the description and using my code, It's History 10 at checkout. Otherwise, until next time, I'm Ryan Sokash, signing off.
Thank you, Ryan. I mean, this was a very good video. I was not expecting this. I mean, before Route 66, I really expected this to be kind of the history of the Route 66, but apparently they're two different things. I don't think I've ever heard of this before. Have you guys? Like, is this something that's actually forgotten in history, or do you guys, like, does everybody know that this existed? But yeah, that was a really cool watch. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching that with me. Thank you for joining. Please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!